When Air New Zealand's flight TE901 crashed into the lower slopes of Antarctica's Mt Erebus late November 1979, the job of recovering the bodies and returning them to their families fell to members of the New Zealand Police. Within hours of the wreckage being found on the slopes of Mt Erebus, the police recovery teams were heading south to Antarctica. Back then, Stuart Layton was a young cop.
That wreckage had been sighted, I believe, about 1 o'clock in the morning, and here we are at 5 o'clock on a plane already travelling down there. The Minister of Science, Bill Birch, was on board, the representatives from Air New Zealand, the accident investigators were on board, and everyone was in their own little groups, working things out using that time. And some of us were just looking out the window, like myself, and contemplating. We're going down to this. And and we don't quite know what we're letting ourselves in for.
Also part of the police body recovery team heading to Antarctica was Sergeant Greg Gilpin.
It was made very clear to us when we attended briefings at McMurdo before we went onto the mountain that our primary role was the body recovery operation, that we were not investigating the crash.
When the two young policemen finally arrived at the crash site, they were faced with a grisly reality.
It was welcome to hell. It was grotesque, it was changing. I was 22 at the time, and I joined the police when I was 17 and a half as a police cadet. And I'd seen quite a few crashes, and I'd seen a lot of death, as most police officers do, and most of that in tragic circumstances. But to see this scene of just utter destruction, and to see all of these people, these bodies, just scattered around the crash site in various degrees of condition, it was just the enormity of it as well. But then your police training kicks in. And how do you eat an elephant? Just one bite at a time. And that's what I started thinking, well, yep, we'll just do this one bite at a time and just work our way through it.
The police team set about recovering not only the frozen bodies, but also the myriad of personal possessions scattered amongst the wreckage.
Because of the high winds that were happening all the time, it would cover things up that were previously seen, but it would also uncover things that were previously hidden. And so that's why you can discover something maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days later that other people who had sifted through it had missed. And it was whilst I was going through that area and just looking at things of interest in the cockpit area that I actually come across Captain Collins's ring binder notebook. People also need to appreciate that there were a lot of diaries and notebooks from the passengers, also in the wreckage trail. And you could pick them up and read them quite easily. And they were very, very moving. Someone had written in their diary describing the flight down, saying how wonderful it was and the views that they saw when they first started seeing the Antarctica and the mountains and whatever. And they were just waxing lyrically about how wonderful it was. And the very last words they wrote in their diary were, "Gee, it's great to be alive."
The pilot Jim Collins' ring binder notebook was tagged and bagged and taken to McMurdo Base. But as the two policemen later discovered, the evidence store was not secure.
Because we didn't have enough staff down there, because of the lack of accommodation, a lot of the property went back and was left in I think it was the fire station, unattended. And from what I've been told, there were people looking at the property, but I don't know who.
The story of the pilot's ring binder notebook has haunted the two policemen for 40 years. Neither knew until much later that the pages which they knew contained vital evidence had been destroyed. Both tried repeatedly to get the New Zealand police to investigate, but nothing ever seemed to happen. So in the end, Greg Gilpin wrote to Peter Mann, and he wrote back.
Dear Sergeant Gilpin, there is little doubt that someone from Air New Zealand got possession of this ring binder notebook, either at McMurdo or at Auckland, and removed the pages before handing over the empty hardback cover to Mrs. Collins. And the reason for this would have been that the flight information which you saw represented the incorrect navigational data which Captain Collins was given at the briefing for the fatal flight. Thank you again for this information, which is most instructive. Yours sincerely, P.T. Mann.
This letter remains one of Greg Gilpin's most prized possessions, and a reminder that justice over the destruction of vital evidence from the crash site has never happened. I'm Garry McAlpine, and this is Erebus Flight 901, Litany of Lies.